Clowns, clowns, and more clowns.
I think they're funny.
They're crazy, but they're kind of neat.
They seem so free. I think I'd like to try it sometime.
All those people are right. Clowns are funny, crazy, neat, and free to do all kinds of things we might not ordinarily do. Clowns offer God's love through the joy promised by Jesus Christ. Hi, I'm Floyd Schaefer, and I'd like to invite you to join me in exploring the world of clown ministry. This video will be divided into 4 parts, and each one builds upon the one that goes before it. Are you ready? Let's get started. Some folks might think that clown ministry is a contradiction. They feel that clowns are the exclusive property of parades, birthday parties, and, of course, the circus. The very thought of clowns engaging in acts of ministry, such as visits to nursing homes and hospitals, Sunday schools, outreach programs, ministry to the deaf, ministry with differently abled people, and yes, even worship, are beyond the wildest imagination. Yet these and many more ministries of clowns have circled the world and are reaching hundreds of thousands of people. There are Christian clown groups in over 40 different Christian denominations. You'll find them in South Africa, where blacks and whites sometimes even clown together. You'll find them in India, where missionaries use the clown to help reinforce Bible stories. You'll find them in South America, Korea, Australia, across Europe, who knows where. It has grown so extensively through word of mouth and clown experiences that it's hard to tell just how far it has spread. Clowns take words and ideas and translate them into action. That's what makes the concept so powerful. Clowning is much more than dressing up and putting on skits. We're dealing with basic communication of the gospel. It's the old biblical story, but it's told in ways that we've not heard it before. In our theology, I have 3 basic points. The first one is, God has a sense of humor, laughs, and delights. This isn't quite the way we normally picture God. So often we picture God as being grim or even angry and extremely long-faced. Yet the Scripture brings to us the concept that God has a sense of delight, and that He has given this gift to us as human beings, and we also have that opportunity to laugh and delight with Him. The second point in our theology is that God is not rational. At least by human standards. Look at Abraham and the way God chose him and sent him off to a promised land without even the benefit of a triptych. And then read the book of Judges and you begin to see some real humor emerge as you look at the judges Samson and Jephthah, who was a bandit, and Gideon. Let your imagination go for just a few moments and you'll see what I mean. Here is Gideon with 300 rather ill-trained troops, and the Lord tells him to arm them with a clay pot, a flaming torch, and a horn, and he is to surround these 15,000 Midianites and break the pot, wave the torch, blow the horn, and beat them. And when you look at the unlikely prophets, you discover Ezekiel, who's seeing wheels up in the air, and kind of makes you wonder what he was doing, doesn't it? And one of the most unlikely evangelists of all time was Jonah, who doesn't even want to convert the people he's sent to convert. Look at the way Jesus Christ called the 12. There was absolutely nothing logical or rational about it. And there's nothing rational about the way God calls you and me. So we have to come up with a word that describes it, and I've chosen the word transrational. That means that God goes above and beyond all the human logic of this world, and in so doing releases His grace to us and enables us to function in a truly remarkable way. Point 3, God uses the principles of comedy in history. Comedy is a process in which things are perceived in one way, are brought down, and through the intervention of a non-heroic character are raised up to new and wonderful heights. In the Bible, this was done with the Israelites. When they forsook the Lord, they were brought down, often through the intervention of foreign troops. But unlikely non-heroic people like the judges and the prophets came along and raised them up to a new level so they could see and understand what God was about. Even in the Christmas story, we begin to discover this principle of comedy. The down, the Word became flesh. God became flesh. We beheld his glory as of the only begotten Son of the Father, the lifting up, Jesus himself being a very unlikely, non-heroic person who was born in a stable, rode on a donkey, and was crucified on a garbage heap outside of Jerusalem. And so we see this rhythm continuing all through Scripture of the comedic use of God at work in history, with the down and the up almost always being tied together with a non-heroic person. That's also the essence of most classic clown skits and humor. Clowns are in the business of lifting people up, not putting people down. Remember those theology points? God has a sense of humor, so do clowns. God is not rational, neither are clowns. God uses the principles of comedy, and so do clowns. Let's stop the tape now and turn to some of the exercises that you're going to find in the Leader's Guide. As we begin to probe the various characteristics of a clown, we are led to ask some questions. What is a clown like? One of the first things that Jesus tells us about is that we ought to become like children, that we ought to have a sense of childlikeness. And we also know that clowns are very childlike. Here's an exercise that's going to help us understand what that's all about. Imagine a stack of calendars with this year on top. Let them slowly flip backward until you come to the year you were 5 or 6 years old. Now think of a good positive experience you had. For instance, raking leaves into a pile and jumping into it could give us the qualities of imagination, playfulness, and fantasy. Watching a sunset over the lake could be awe and wonder. Walking through a mud puddle could be sensual, a great word we misuse because it means of the senses, and God gave us these gifts. Climbing a tree could be a risk and excitement. Or crowded in a family car on a trip could be touch. Let's stop the tape now and turn to some of the exercises that you're going to find in the Leader's Guide. All of these things, imagination, playfulness, fantasy, awe, wonder, sensuality, and touch are the qualities that help us to become extremely childlike, and that's important in clowning. We're going to start with one of these now. Let's consider imagination. And in imagination, we want to take a common object and set it apart for uncommon or special use. For example, take this handkerchief. Please, let your imagination run loose. If you were a clown, what are some of the things that you could do with it? You may have come up with some other ideas too. For instance, I'd like you to think of some kind of an object you have on you right now. It might be a key, it might be a shoe, it might be a gum wrapper, it could be almost anything, it might even be a pencil. And what I want you to do is to use it in a way other than it was intended. For instance, I don't want you to be writing with the pencil, I don't want you to be putting smiley faces on someone's hand, but you've got something long and thin. What kind of things could you do with it in a playful situation as you interact with other people in your group? Let's stop the tape right now and have some fun. Well, how'd it go? Chances are when you began to use the object one way, the imagination of another person enabled you to use it in another way. Imagination seems to beget imagination. That's why two clowns working together make a fantastic team, for what the one does seems to stimulate the imagination of the other. Untapping the imagination means taking something that we see very clearly in our mind's eye and translating it into words. Why don't we stop the tape right now and turn to some of the imagination exercises that we find in the Leader's Guide. We've examined our childlike characteristics. We've limbered up our imagination. We've also included some childlike emotions. It's time now to begin to limber up our bodies. It's not quite what I was thinking about, but there is a message behind it. Play is a very important childlike exercise. And when you couple play together with physical movement, you have a couple of the real characteristics that are extremely important in clowning. Remember those slow motion movies where the person is actually moving very fast, but the camera is able to slow it down? What we're going to be doing is making big, slow moves, but still keeping your body in control. Another important clown movement is just the opposite of slow motion. And of course, clowns also use normal speed movements. There you have three basic styles of clown movement. And I'd like you now to take an exercise from the clown book of tag. It's a simple game, and your leader is going to give you instructions where you'll use all three styles and speeds. What this means is when your leader calls out a change in time, I want you as a whole group to react immediately to that, because these are at the very heart and core of all clown movements and your ability to change mood very quickly. So let's turn off the video right now and have a good time. Okay, that gives you a sense of movement, a change of pace, and bodily movements. Now we're going to combine imagination and movement, bringing them together. And here's our friend again. What we're doing is combining our imagination with physical movement. As clowns, we need to learn to pace ourselves and our emotions and be able to quickly change from one mood or mode to the other. We don't just move with rapid motions. Sometimes the slow, deliberate motions communicate more clearly. We need to recall that we communicate with our whole body. Now there are some exercises I'd like you to do. See you soon. You may not know it, but you're taking some major steps toward developing your own clown identity. Clowning is an art form where form follows function. That simply means that when you determine the function, what it is you're going to do, you then are able to determine the kind of props you carry, the kind of costume you wear, the kind of makeup you put on, even the kind of skits that you share in. All of these come together and begin to develop your very own clown personality. Besides childlikeness and physical movement that we've looked at, makeup and appearance are of big importance for clowns. Most clowns fall into one of four categories. One of these is the white face. The white-faced clown may be described using a lot of different words, but one of the key words which stands out is the word joy-bringer. The white-faced clown is playful. The white-faced clown often takes the lead in many of the skits. This particular clown will use childlike qualities, toys, fuzzy animals. You can find this clown being playful, gently mischievous. In fact, we can describe the action as being the exaggeration of everything that is childlike. You find that exaggeration because that's what clowns do. We even exaggerate the face at times, and some parts of the costume. The white-faced clown can best be known in makeup circles as being primarily white and emphasizing two major parts of the face. It might be the mouth and the nose, or the mouth and the eyebrows, or any other two parts of the face. There can be other markings, but generally they're seen as accents. The real classic white face does not have an overabundance of symbols used. The basic colors are generally the white, the red, and some black for lining. Many clowns enjoy putting a wide variety of symbols on their face, and I think it's all right as long as it doesn't detract. Try not to let your face become too busy. The second clown type is the tramp, or the sad-faced clown. The function of the sad-faced clown can be seen as the one who evokes care. Perhaps you might simply say this is the clown that brings out the caring instinct in people. Most people want to make a sad person unsad. As this character develops, you find a person on whom the weight of the whole world seems to be bearing down. The shoulders slump, the knees may point out. You may find slow movements. You'll have the tattered clothing, the unkempt look, and generally a pathetic appearance. The tramp clown will be noted for the mouth, which can be turned down, the white around the mouth, occasionally the white around the eyes, and the rather decrepit look of the hat, the coat, the tie, and all the clothing that is worn. The function of this clown dates as far back as the Old Testament. There was a person called the sojourner. The sojourner was a traveler, an individual without a homeland, one who walked around and brought out the caring instinct in other people. In fact, in the book of Hebrews, we find the writer telling us that we should receive sojourners in our home, because in so doing, we might be receiving an angel unawares. We find these people, the travelers, the nomads, who, carrying their small possessions, wrapped in a cloth or in a pouch about their waist, or in a rag tied to a stick, quietly, tiringly walking down the road. In today's society, we find people called the bag ladies on the streets of our major cities. We find the homeless men. And when we see them, it certainly evokes a feeling of care within us. This is probably the most difficult clown to portray because it's extremely difficult to stay in character, especially when you would rather be skipping down the street with joy, and yet this particular clown communicates that the weight of the world is upon its shoulders. The third clown type is the August. August was a famous clown who, in a fit of burnout, got somewhat inebriated, we're told, and showed up at the circus one night, smearing his eyes with white, putting on rather a mixed bag of clothing, and then falling, tripping, and stumbling about the ring. The ringmaster began to chase August, and trying to get him out of the circus turned it into a funny routine. The crowd loved it, and the August clown was born with the big shoes, the small hat, some of the clothing that did not fit properly or mismatched, and taking the falls. This clown is best known for the flesh tone around the outer parts of the face and the large sections of white around the eyes and around the mouth. A good August's makeup takes a lot of practice, but it is an extremely popular kind of clown. There's a lot of beauty in the concept of the August clown because it brings us into full knowledge of the concepts of sin and grace and forgiveness. But the real gift that the August clown brings to us is the reminder of our humanness, that although we may fall and fall daily, there are those resources that help us to stand. and it brings to us very clearly that message of God's grace and God's willingness to reach down and lift us up when we fall. The fourth clown type is one that we call the character clown. It's a bit more difficult to describe because there may be a lot of characters limited only by our imagination. For instance, one character clown might be a Raggedy Ann or a Raggedy Andy. It might be a baker or a fisherman or a cowboy or ballet dancer or a nurse or a doctor. Some definable characterization, and the function generally exaggerates that particular character. Here's what I mean. So there you have the four clown types. The white face, which is the joy bringer, the sad face or the tramp clown, which brings out the caring instinct in people, the Auguste, which reminds us of our humanity, and the character clown that simply helps us to understand the function of the particular character. Let's stop the tape now and turn to some of the exercises that you're going to find in the Leader's Guide. When you've discovered your function, now it's time to sit down and look at the kind of makeup and the way the makeup goes on. And for a lot of clowns, that can be pretty confusing. First off, let's take a look at some basic clown makeup supplies. There'll be a list of these given in the Leader's Guide, but I thought you just might want to see what some of them are like. We have here Clown White. Clown White's a basic white cream that gives you the coverage that you want and you need. Comes in several different brands, and you just need to pick the one that works best for you. Along with the Clown White, you need a theatrical pencil. A theatrical pencil is one that makes a narrow black line, and sometimes clowns enjoy having a wider line that they can use for eyebrows. Notice the difference. Along with those, you'd need a pencil sharpener, one for the small theatrical pencil, and you need another one for the large theatrical pencil. We also need some paper towels to clean off hands and other things like that, and some tissues for taking off makeup and blotting the makeup. And before we start, we often like to put on a little moisturizing cream. I'm prone to use Nivea because it's easy to carry in my clown kit. You don't want it to be greasy. You want something that can absorb into the skin. It not only helps fill the pores, but it also assists in cleaning off some of the brighter colors. We need a mirror that you can look into and examine your makeup carefully, and something to keep the hair off your forehead so you don't get the makeup into your hair. Sometimes a little headband like this is good. I don't use one because my head is so big and they tend to break. Sometimes just an old ball cap works good. Put it on backwards and it keeps the hair off the forehead. We also have some colors that need to go on. The colors come in a variety of forms. These are called lining sticks, and they're used for filling in some of the larger areas or putting on wide lines on your face. The same colors you'll find in little tubs like this. Some clowns like to put their makeup on with fingers, or in this case, they may use a brush. The kind of brush that I recommend is a sable brush. It draws a very neat line, and all you need to do is touch this into some oil, wipe off the excess, brush it back and forth, and you can do some rather intricate lining. I think that most clowns only need perhaps one beginning brush, which I'd recommend about 1/4 of an inch. Along with this, we need to set the makeup. When we say set the makeup, it means putting some talcum powder on so that when you're done, your face is totally dry and you can wipe your fingers across it and no makeup will come off. Beginners like myself appreciate using just a child's cotton stocking, and I fill it with talcum powder, and as you pat your face, you'll notice a nice even coat of powder comes off, and that is impregnated into the makeup and sets it nicely. Some clowns like to put their powder on with a lamb's wool puff. This is a very nice one. What they do is you scoop the powder and you literally throw it on your face as you pat it lightly, and then you're able to take the softness and brush off the excess powder. Another way to brush off the excess powder is through the use of a shaving brush or a children's hairbrush. I happen to use both, one for the reds and one for the whites. You can also buy just a simple powder brush at almost any makeup store. Sometimes when we're thinking about our makeup, we get a little bit of concern about our nose. Noses can come in a variety of shapes, and they're available in all kinds of stores. The one that I choose to use, I put on with just some simple elastic string that I buy in a notions store. But there are other clowns who don't like to see that string that's visible, so they'll use a lightweight red rubber nose, and we'll put it on perhaps with spirit gum, or one of the things that works really well is some surgical tape that has a double sticky side. You put a little piece in on each side, clamp it on your nose, and it stays nicely. Remember, if you are going to use a rubber nose, you should clean your nose thoroughly. If you don't, the adhesive material won't stick too well. I have to clean mine with alcohol because I perspire quite profusely, and there's nothing more embarrassing than to have your nose come sliding off. A real good alternative is to use no rubber nose at all. Simply draw on your nose, powder it nicely, and you'll never have to worry about losing your nose ever in any crowd. My makeup is fairly simple, but it will give you an idea not only of the white-faced makeup, but the same principles which will apply to any of the makeups. I like to start by putting just a few drops of moisturizer cream on my face. Make sure it's a very small amount. I use a theatrical pencil to outline my mouth. One of the things we ought to remember is that the outer edge of your mouth should at no time extend beyond a straight line from the outside corner of your eye. Once I'm satisfied, I begin the application of the white. One thing that really helps is if the makeup is at body temperature. When I make up in public, I sometimes carry my clown white in my pocket for about a half hour in advance, which brings it up to body temperature. When you put the white makeup on, you essentially want to get just enough to cover your skin so that the flesh tone of your skin does not show through in a dominant way. If you get it too thick, it is almost impossible to thin it down. Although you can put colors over the white, they're not quite as bright as if they go on the bare skin. So I put the white makeup around my mouth and bring it right up to the black line. When the white is on, take 2 or 3 fingers and begin patting it firmly. Don't just touch it, pat it. And as you do, you'll notice that the streaks of makeup begin to disappear. When I'm not making up in public, I like to dip my fingers into cold water and continue the patting. For me, I find it makes the makeup a bit more tacky and now able to receive the powder that I'm going to put on. I powder between the coats of makeup, and that's called the dry face technique. Many clowns who are very adept at their makeup will put all of their colors on and then powder. This gives them the chance to make corrections in the event there has been a mistake. It's time for the powder now. Simply take the powder bag full of baby powder and pat it all over the makeup. Don't wrinkle your brow or squint your eyes, or you'll leave some greasy lines when the powdering is done. When you're done, let it stand for just a few seconds. And then take a brush and brush off the excess powder. Now it's time for the colors. I'm going to use a red lining stick because it seems to work well for me. I have a big mouth, and that's probably both in makeup and out of makeup as well. When I use a lining stick, I don't have to pat the colors when I'm done. They go on quite smoothly. I want my mouth to be mobile, so as a white-faced clown, I leave the red makeup off my upper lip just below the nose. It's helpful to do this because it adds to the mobility of your face. If you put the red makeup above your upper lip and almost up to the nose, it eliminates much of the movement which your mouth can give. Don't forget that red is a very powerful color, and too much red can create a sense of the grotesque, which is something we try to avoid. Some clowns can get away with it, but that's because they have an unusual character. Since I apply my makeup with the dry face technique, I'll powder it, and after I've powdered it, I'll once more brush it off. As a hint, I try to have two brushes, because one will undoubtedly get some red on it. That could put some red on my white face when I don't want it. The two features of my face, which I emphasize, are the mouth and the red rubber nose. That will go on in just a minute. Before that, I'm going to add my eyebrows, and after I get my eyebrows in place, I'll outline my mouth with a black line. You may want to lean your elbow on the table as you apply it, so that the black line will go where you wish. The reason for outlining the mouth is to give it more definition at a distance. The black line seems to enable people to see and identify your features clearly. To finish my face, I'll spray it with water and press a tissue over it to absorb the water and along with it some of the fragments of powder which have remained. This will brighten the colors and will also assist in setting the makeup properly. If you applied your makeup well, you should be able to draw your fingers lightly across your face at this time. No makeup will appear on your fingers and it will be dry to the touch. Since I've come this far, I might as well go all the way. I'll finish my costume, and when I'm done, I think I'll do one of the first sermons that I ever did as a clown. It's based on 1 John 3:18. I call it, What Do You Do With Love? When clowns put on makeup for the first time, they often act as if they're hiding behind a mask. I've found that throughout the years, quite the opposite is true. When clowns put on makeup, they very often become closer to their real self. If not their real self, perhaps an exaggeration of it, or the kind of self they would like to be. Let's stop the tape now and turn to some of the exercises that you're going to find in the Leader's Guide. One of the problems which clowns often encounter is how to put together a workable, understandable skit or routine. The technique is not especially hard, and with some practice and other people it becomes a lot easier. We need to keep in mind this whole concept of comedy, the bringing down and the raising up, and that it almost always happens with a non-heroic character. There's lots of scripture that speaks to this. One is in the first chapter of Luke, where Mary is singing the Magnificat. In there you hear these tremendous words about bringing down the mighty from their thrones and exalting those of low degree. It's one of many scripture passages which speak about elevating the poor, not just those people who are poor in money, but those who are poor in reputation, in power, in the ones that are the have-nots of this world. Somehow God elevates those and reminds us it is our task as well. The skit that you're going to see is one that's a fairly traditional one in clowning. It's fairly easy to put on. And by the way, not all skits really have to be funny. Okay, here's how we designed the skit. We chose the text from Scripture, we read it thoroughly, we talked about it to make sure we knew what it was going to communicate. We looked for some of those qualities which would enable us to exaggerate it and put it into a clown skit, and here's what we came up with. To develop this skit, we summarize the text in a simple sentence. Winners lose and losers win. A bullfight was just one of the many ideas to reverse roles, use exaggeration, and the gentle humor that comes with the quick finish. Let's summarize skit development again. When you select your text, read it carefully, talk about it, and then attempt to summarize it in one brief sentence. Then close the Bible, lay it aside, and talk about how you can communicate the truth of that idea. When you do that, you begin to use the principles of exaggeration and drama. You don't always have to reenact the text. You want to communicate the essence of the message. Sometimes that's hard to do, and a lot of practice may be needed to let it happen. This brings us to the end of part one of our four-step series on growing in clown ministry. Summarizing it, we've learned a little bit about the theology of the clown, the history, the biblical background. We've learned to be able to enjoy and be free in physical movement, to get in touch with ourselves, to be able to use our imagination, to begin to develop a clown character as we probe the functions of clowning, as well as a bit of understanding of clown makeup. In addition, we've probed a little bit about developing skits and choosing the right ones. There is no substitute for the kind of practice that we're going to have. Not only will you begin to grow and develop in your understanding of clowning, but you're going to grow in your understanding of the Holy Scriptures. And as you begin to carry them out into the world, some wonderful things are going to happen. As one of my good friends so often tells me, it doesn't matter what you're doing, but what's happening while you're doing it. I think that once more reinforces the idea that Christian clowning is not always what you're doing, but who's under the makeup and why you're doing it. Something's going on. And that something is a relationship. And that relationship opens up all kinds of possibilities for service and teaching in the way that Jesus Christ went about doing it, lifting people up, holding them up to new possibilities, holding them up to new opportunities. Because as we begin to get it together in clown ministry, we begin to discover some things about ourselves. We begin to discover things about others. And even if we stopped at this particular point, we could call it clown ministry, and it would have value. There are some exercises in the book that I'd like you to look at, and I'll be seeing you soon, and happy clowning. When you're ready to launch out into the unknown, possibly the best place to begin is in a nursing home or a care center for the elderly. One reason is simply this: the elderly really receive you quite well. I think it's because they already know how vulnerable they are. They're lonely, and they long for touch. So as clowns, we take seriously what Jesus said in Matthew 25. I'll put this in my own words. If a person is hungry, you feed them. If they're thirsty, you give them something to drink. And here I add my own words. If they're in need of touch, you touch them. If they're in need of a smile, you give them a smile. There are a few common sense rules that every clown ought to be aware of before planning to go into a nursing home. First, call the activities director or the manager of the institution and get permission to come. That will give you an opportunity to share what it is you plan to do, that you won't be making any noise or disrupting the activities of the home, and that the mission you're on is extremely important. In fact, what you'll discover is that once you're there, you're going to find it pretty hard to get away. Second, if it's your first time, plan on about a half-hour visit. During that 1 half-hour visit of non-speaking clowning, you will discover a lot of energy has been expended. Next, when you enter the nursing home, do not stand there with your group in a large cluster of clowns. Clowns can look rather intimidating if you see a lot of them in one place. Be sure to choose a partner. 2 clowns together are really great. If you attempt to make visits with 3 or 4, you outnumber the person so much that they may feel a bit uneasy. A couple of cautions. Don't fulfill any request that is made of you by a patient. You're going to have your heartstrings tugged as you hear their plaintive voices asking you to help them out of bed or into bed, or to take them outdoors, or to hand them something. The best rule of thumb is don't do it. If you do encounter something that you feel is a real need, go to the desk or seek out an aide. Break your silence and let the request be made known. Also, check in advance with the head of nursing at the desk to find out if a particular patient might have some problems that you might encounter. Also, do not enter a room with a closed door. When you come to a door which is open and there are residents inside, remind yourself that this is their home. We don't walk into other people's homes unannounced. Rather, we wait for someone to invite us in. Give a little knock on the door. Give a good clown-like look, a gentle wave, a clown pose, and then respond to what you see. Don't interfere with their personal possessions, such as pictures, books, or various items that may be sitting on their table. You can approach them, for instance. You can smile at a picture, Or you can smell the flowers and exhibit great delight. Or you can look at the television, and if it's a particular program that evokes humor, you can fall into gales of silent laughter. Essentially, your task is to raise the people up, to know that you are giving them a smile in the name of Jesus Christ, and to let them know that they are a person of worth, and that you care about them. One of the things we have to remember is that people in an institution will respond strongly to their senses. That means things they can hear, see, touch, and smell. Almost any touch is good, but there is a difference between good touch and better. For example, putting one's hand on another person's head creates a feeling of power upon a powerless person. But if you let your hand come down on their shoulder and give them a gentle pat on the shoulder, it's more of a feeling of camaraderie or friendship. If you move your hand to their upper forearm and give it a gentle squeeze, or hold their hand, it indicates friendship, warmth, humanness, and the fact that they are a person of worth. Other great ways to use people's senses are to use props, such as a soft, fuzzy animal. It might be a hand puppet, it might be something they can pet, it might be a stuffed animal which is carried. That may not seem like much, but it means that the two of you have a relationship because you can share in showing some affection toward a common object. Please remember that a prop is not just a prop, it's a friend. So if you do have a stuffed animal or a hand puppet, it's part of yourself, and it's a very close friend. If you happen to use a flower in your routine, put on a few drops of perfume so that it has a pleasant smell. And through the use of the exaggeration of motion and movement, the other person may join in sharing that with you. Another activity that is often used is play. For instance, you can blow up a balloon and get a few people to bounce it back and forth. You're doing more with something like this than you think, because you are enabling them to use muscles that they haven't used in a long time, and they are engaging in a very non-threatening activity. One rather simple thing that people enjoy is going for a ride. For most of those, it's going for a ride in a wheelchair. You could have a pretend race. You're actually not going fast, but you create the illusion by making the sound of a motor as you go. Be sure you don't go too fast. There may be times when you really have to talk. When I encounter that situation, I generally hold up two hands in kind of a stop motion. I'll turn around and take my nose and put it up on my forehead. When I come back to them, I'm out of character. And I remind them that when my nose isn't on, I'm not really completely a clown. I'll deal with the situation, and then I may ask them, is it okay if I go back into my clown character again? When they say yes, I give them another stop, turn around, bring my nose down, and once more I'm back into my clown character. I think perhaps you could take something that you identify with, a hat, a button, a pair of gloves, Anything that gives you a little bit of a reason that to have it on makes you completely a clown, and to have it off enables you to leave your clown character. The reason I begin institutional work in a nursing home is because the elderly give us far more than we give to them, and that gives our clowns a great deal of confidence. There are other institutions that offer up additional possibilities. Of these, we have hospitals, which we first get permission to enter. One of the neat things about working in a hospital is someone is bound to come up to you and say, "Boy, do I know someone who could use you now." That opens all kinds of opportunities for additional clown ministry. So often we don't reach the staff, and yet as clowns you have the opportunity to touch the lives of people who are working behind the desks and carrying out many of the other tasks in the hospital. Other institutional ministry may be found in places that serve people with emotional and mental needs. In many of these places, you can gain permission to come in for a half hour or so to the recreational area where people gather. This is the kind of ministry wherein you really need to feel free with your qualities of childlikeness. The ability to play is extremely important. Such things as little games that are played, jumping an imaginary rope, a volleyball game with a balloon, or playing with a hand puppet together, all of these things provide a real opportunity for interaction. Be aware that here people identify with the clown, because the clown does not always appear to be rational either. Somehow the non-speaking clown has the opportunity to reach people where words just won't work. Remember to call for an appointment, tell them exactly what you're going to do, and they'll give you the guidelines that enable you to go forth with a ministry that will bring a great deal of joy to the folks that are there. Last on the institutional level is a form of clowning that may not be for everyone. It has to do with ministry in the hospice situation, both the place and the program, where people are in life-threatening situations and know they are soon to die. This is difficult because the clown who engages in this ministry really needs to have some research or reading or understanding of the hospice movement, what it means, what it does. And the second thing, and I can only say this in simple language, you've got to have your head screwed on right. This is a ministry which will tug at the strings of your heart. And yet there are some remarkable things that happen as I could unfold story after story of an individual who had a wonderful relationship with a clown who came to visit on a regular basis. All of these institutional ministries are reflected in the words which our Lord Jesus Christ gave to us and are at the heart of it all. Inasmuch as you have done it to the least of these, my brothers and sisters, you have done it to me. The next time we come together, we're going to move on to the level of clowning which is called street clowning. Hi, and welcome to the next part of our program. I hope your institutional clowning trip was a real success. The third level in terms of difficulty is street clowning. And the reason for difficulty lies in the fact that you're interacting with strangers who are coming and going, and you've really only got just a very few moments to be with them. Generally, it's in a public place, like a mall, on the beach, along the sidewalk, wherever people gather. Street clowning requires a comfort level so that you're not intimidated by the fact that things don't always seem to go according to script. And you need a couple of routines so that you can interact quickly with people. At the same time, clowns ought to always remember that we're in the process of raising people up and not putting people down. Street clowning involves two main parts, sight gags and magic. But in all cases, the clown is set up as a klutz, and in the process is raising other people up. Sight gags are visual humor that generally involve the use of props. For instance, anyone can balance balloons. The basic rule is to keep your eye on the top, and when you do that, simple concentration enables you to follow the movement quite clearly. After the balancing has taken place, the clown then rather smugly balances a feather on the nose. You may not do this unless you have a rubber nose or some kind of an arrangement whereby the feather can be inserted. This gives the clown a sense of playfulness and identifies the dumbness and the klutziness which the clown produces. Here's another sight gag. It's a breakaway flower. It has a little ring on the bottom, and all you need to do is pull it down and the flower breaks away. Too often, though, it's used in the wrong way. The wrong way would be to have a person kiss it or blow on it, and then when you pull the ring, the flower collapses, and the implication is that the person has bad breath. While people will laugh, they're actually laughing at the wrong thing. They're laughing at the person, not at the clown. We want the humor to be directed toward the clown. So the clown is the one who perhaps kisses or breathes on the flower and it breaks away, and when the other person has an opportunity to breathe or kiss it, it rises up. Now you've established a relationship with a person. You've made them your helper, one who has assisted in the routine and helped to make it work. Another sight gag that's based on a simple prop is the use of the paper bag. All you do is put 2 fingers in the bag, your thumb on the outside, snap your fingers and the bag will pop. It carries with it the illusion that an invisible ball has been caught in the bag. You can do a lot of routines with this, like involving a lot of different people in a game of toss, maybe even a baseball game. Another way to involve people is with simple magic, and I do put the emphasis on simple. It's so simple, in fact, that I call it klutz magic. Klutz magic means that only the clown is impressed. The audience sees through everything that's happening. Klutz magic can be found and invented on many levels. A simple handkerchief or scarf can be used to make the fingers disappear. You'll notice that another person was utilized to help bring the fingers back to their normal and natural position. This would be that lifting them up rather than putting them down. So the clown is amazed, and it offers the opportunity to say thank you with a hug. Sometimes it's just the presence of the clown that makes a difference. That presence is greatly determined by your clown character. If you happen to be a tramp clown, you can continue to evoke the caring instincts from people. You might have a bag in which there is a hole, and as you pick up some of the little odds and ends in the mall or on the sidewalk, you put them in the bag, and they continually seem to fall out the other side. You really attempt to do good deeds with a small toy broom and continue to pick up the trash, playing the servant role, but things just don't seem to be happening in the right way. And finally, perhaps it can be overcome as you draw other people into helping you. They might hold the bag. They might make it possible for your bag to hold some of the trash, and giving them a little tip of the hat, a long smile, and a slow move, proceed on your way. The white-faced clowns who do a lot of playing can use all sorts of activities in a large group if you want to get several people doing something together. The blowing up of the balloon and getting a volleyball game going across a string net that is held by two clowns or two persons can engage people in some momentary breaks in the busyness of their day. In so doing, you would have done something good for them. You have ministered to them in what I would call the ministry of play. One clown used to go out with some soap bubbles. While blowing the bubbles, the children would come over and attempt to pop them, chase them, and break them, and generally had a good time. Another sad-faced clown stood on a corner, held a paper plate in front of himself, and with a very woebegone look, people would attempt to make him smile. He would then flip the paper plate, and on it were the words, "Smiles are free." Generally, the people would go on their way with a smile on their lips. There are lots of things you can do with feather dusters or other simple props that enable you to interact with people on a one-to-one basis and at the same time do effective clowning and reach them with a hint of God's love. It doesn't have to be complicated. We have to realize that in street clowning, we're not there as Christians for the purpose of converting people, but rather to work with them where they are. That's what God has always done. God works with people where they are, not where they ought to be. So when people ask me what Christian clowning is, I generally tell them it depends on who's under the makeup. It means they know what they're doing. Jesus said that if a person is thirsty, you give them something to drink. If they're hungry, you give them food. And I'd like to add that if they need a smile, you give them a smile. And you know that when you're doing it in the name of the Lord, that blesses it. Well, it's time to go out on the street and test our skills. So hit the road, clowns. I'll see you later. Hi, I'm glad to see you again. The fourth level of difficulty in clown ministry is one that comes as a surprise to many people. I call it simply clowning in church. One of the reasons I put church clowning in the fourth position of difficulty is that I feel that all clowning done in the context of the church ought to be done to the very best of our ability. Therefore, the experiences and learnings from the other levels and the opportunities to sharpen our skills, improve our makeup, and the understanding we have of working with people is very important to do effective ministry in an extremely sensitive area. Let's face it, you're actually in ministry in the other three areas, especially to the institutions of your community and behalf of your church. All of these help to develop a good reputation that you do fine, sensitive clowning. And it begins to open up doors for some people who might have some questions about actual clowning in the church. That good reputation will be very helpful. You won't have to struggle to get invitations to clown in your congregation once you've developed a good reputation. You'll have invitations to come to the church picnic, to some of the socials or festivals that you have. Those are fine opportunities to practice and develop your skills on some different styles of street clowning. But as we move into the church program, there are some things that we can do that pave the way. You might begin by clowning at Vacation Church School, at a Sunday school opening, or perhaps even making a surprise visit to a class. Oh, when I call it a surprise, I mean it's a surprise to the class, but hopefully you'll work it out with the teacher in advance. You can be a vital and important part of all of these to help the theme become real and clear. After you've built your reputation, you're ready to move toward clowning in a worship setting. There are two ways to introduce clowning into the worship life of your congregation and make the experience positive. The first is a biblical skit or routine which relates to the scripture lesson for the day. The positive side of this is enabling people to understand and remember that which they heard on Sunday. The reasoning is that you're using more than one sense. Normally we just use our ears. Now the members will use their eyes and their ears. With the use of two senses, people will hear the scripture being read, then they'll see it enacted in a kind of parable form, and then they will also hear the pastor preach on that text. That increases not only the ability to hear clearly, but in a very direct way enables people to remember what happened in church even several weeks afterwards. I often suggest that people do this as part of the children's time in worship. Most churches seem to have a time with the children or a children's sermon, and this is quite effective. A positive side to this is that congregations are generally very open to what goes on during that children's time, so that people who might not normally appreciate clowns in church would appreciate this, especially if it's done tastefully. The second way to introduce clowning into the worship setting is through the use of the interruption. An interruption should be tasteful and gentle. It should be low-key and fit into the order of worship.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this Palm Sunday. I think that as we reflect on the meaning of Palm Sunday, it's important for us to pause and think about the reason that we celebrate. Jesus came riding into Jerusalem on a donkey. People came to greet him, waving palm branches. His disciples had warned him not to go. You see, Jesus knew... Sir? Sir? Yes, you. What are you doing here? Don't you know this is the house of the Lord? Look at you, you're filthy. Your clothes are atrocious. Well, the least you could do is go back and sit in the back of the church where you belong. Sir? Sir? I wonder if any of us here would really know Jesus if he appeared here in our church on Palm Sunday. I wonder.
So the interruption can be a very powerful style of clowning when it's not used too often. There are some hints that I think should not be called rules, which I have found to be most effective in clowning during worship. One is simply this: it's more powerful to underwhelm a group than to overwhelm. By that I mean there is more power in the quiet, gentle clown than in one who insists on skipping and clapping and making fast and rapid, disruptive moves and noises. This means we trust the people to get the message. The slower movements and the ability to pace one's movements results in the lifting up of people. It gives them an opportunity to see and understand what is going on. Another helpful hint is a very practical suggestion. Don't use too many clowns. If the group of clowns is too large, it tends to interfere with the communication process. Another hint which is difficult to teach is the use of common sense. Common sense tells us, when in doubt, don't do it. For instance, Certain parts of the worship area are special. That means that while they can be involved, we don't do anything that would put them down in the eyes of the people who are watching us carefully. For instance, over the years I have developed my own altar using a folding table and putting my items on top of it. I have my own candles, my Bible, and altar cloth, and I create my own worship setting. I feel in that way I'm not misusing the symbols that are important in another group's house of worship. When it comes to the actual worship event, and that means an entire clown service, there ought to be a number of things happening at this point. Your pastor or minister needs to be consulted. I also feel that they can give you guidance and direction as to the openness of your congregation for this kind of an event. One hint's to have it at a special time, an evening where people have a choice of coming or not coming. If you're a church that has 2 services on Sunday, one hint is to offer one service in the traditional format and the other as a clown worship. We need to be aware that when we do something that is dramatically different, such as a clown worship, there are people who are guardedly watching us and will do a more careful analysis of what we do then than they normally would do on a Sunday morning. Perhaps at this point it would be best to show you a few parts of a clown worship. We won't go through an entire service, but just show you some of the things I might do. That brings us to the end of our class. I hope you enjoyed the experience, and I hope that you'll continue to grow in your clowning. Remember, you can bring joy and love to many people in Jesus' name and show God's love and acceptance. And besides that, it's fun. See you Tuesday.